Hi, I'm Gianluca Fiorelli and welcome back to the third session. Today we are going to have a guest from the Netherlands with a Spanish name, but he's not Spanish. And he is in school, the Dutch school of SEO. There are so many SEO from the Netherlands that really are contributing to the community and to the knowledge of the community. For instance, another case, Barry Adams, which who sounds very British, is coming from the Netherlands, but Joost, but many others. And our guest is an SEO consultant, works a lot with enterprise, and he loves to define himself as the mad scientist. And somehow I can tell you he's a little mad, but in the good sense. Our guest today is Ramon Eijkemans.
Almost.
I don't know. It was good. Because I love you, Dutch, but what I don't like are your surname are sometimes very complicated to pronounce for
Yeah, it
a
seems to be
Mediterranean person like me. How are you doing?
busy.
Oh, yeah, that's a good news, no?
That is good news. Yeah. Last year was slow, not due to me, but I don't know. I talked to other freelancers and agencies also as well. They said, yeah, things are slow. I don't know why. There could be many things, but right now things are picking up, and especially because companies want to do things with AI and LLMs. And well, I happen to have an opinion about that.
Yes.
So
So how SEO is treating you?
mm, it is my first instinct would be to say define SEO, but that is a question in itself, one I like discussing. But yeah, it's good. I feel the same way when I started in SEO a long time ago. I was lured towards a mystery that I was trying to solve, a puzzle that needed to be done, an issue to be fixed, which was how does this work? How can I want to control this in some way? And there is a new machine in town that I'm trying to comprehend and deal with. Yeah, it is definitely back in the stage of it being a hobby and me trying to read everything I can about this and test things and think about it and discuss it and try it, and I love it. So yeah, it's treating me well.
Yeah, this is a common sensation that not just you, not just me, but also many of the guests of the session share. Many of the guests with some story in the profession that say this is very similar to when we started, and there were no playbook already defined. So we needed to test everything to try to understand, to reverse engineer, to somehow interpret and translate what really, for instance, Google at the time, and now also all the new players like OpenAI, Claude, Perplexity are saying when we are saying something, because this is the problem, which is ironic, don't you think? Because it's something which is really related to semantics, to clarity, to language, and the people creating all these new things and selling also these new things sometimes fails in clarity, fails in semantics because they use the same word for 300 different things. Don't you agree?
Definitely. So clarity, or well, I like to call it utility, is a thing. For example, I think that the way a search engine displays its results has actually made it convenient for us to not be so clear or useful in our content. For example, a listing page of a shop have a title, usually the category, the product category or something like that, and then there's a list with links to products and maybe some attributes of products within it, or maybe some reviews, but the text itself is just really short. And humans understand it fine, I guess. But LLMs or language machines, I just call them language machines because it's not just LLMs. They need a little bit more context and explanation and introduction. Okay, what follows is a review. This is the average review, something like that. And then they know that the number that follows is actually an average rating or something like that, or a specification of a product or context. And that was usually lacking. And I think we're finding out now that we need to up our game a little bit in this regard, which is something I like because it's actually where I come from. I was
Yeah, I
I
mean,
wasn't technical or
from
marketing.
where are you coming? So to kill, in this
Yeah,
sense, using the
I used to
context.
be, before I dived into hypertext,
Mhm.
I used to dive into philosophy and history and the combination of the two. And I used to read more difficult German philosophers or St. Augustine or stuff like that before I read anything about HTML. I heard about
Well,
HTML.
in this case, we have something in common because yes,
Yes.
I also come from humanistic studies, let's call it
Yeah.
so. Not all. This is something that I always want to make clear. I'm not coming from computer science, as many other SEOs do. Are not even coming from, let's say, from the business marketing
No,
kind of studies.
me neither.
All these things I learned in 30 plus years of working, even before starting and pivoting on SEO. I
Mm.
was lucky with my studies, the humanistic ones. And I think somehow, because part of it, they were very specific about linguistic. So everything's coming very useful right now.
Yeah.
But especially because they gave me a mental framework, a way of thinking
Hmm.
that sometimes I'm not telling this at all as a critique to other studies, but sometimes other types of study maybe fails. So other kind of studies tend to, let's say, data driven. They need data in order to
Mm.
do and develop something.
Mm.
And what the data tells them, they do. We are more speculative. So these are the data. What we can do with the data, not necessarily what the data are suggesting immediately to do,
Hmm.
but what the data may also suggest to do, which is a slight difference.
Which is a slight difference. One thing, for example, is one thing the same source of data can deliver very different answers depending on the type of question you're asking.
Yes.
And depending on who is asking, depending on what you want, why you're asking it. So even within a few words, there might be a whole other world behind it, which is kind of a relationship between the question that is asked and the source or the data it is asked to or at to. For example, my thesis was about archives and
Mhm.
historical archives. And I was already hooked on internet things when I came to my thesis. And it was about new tagging systems to improve archive indexes. I was inspired by a website called Delicious. You might still know it. It was basically a
Yes,
tagging
I
site.
remember. I remember.
Yeah, yeah. So you had a website
I
if
mean,
someone.
I also remember that
Right.
it was spam to the death.
Sorry.
It was also spam to the death. Yeah,
I,
yeah. I mean, it was also the classic. Now the smart guys will call it a classic site for good parasite, because
mm,
you could substantially create things that could be indexed and putting links that you
hmm.
wanted. So it was very
Yeah,
easy to spam.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
But yes, I remember it was a very wonderful repository for your own links, the
yeah.
things that you
Definitely,
wanted to add.
definitely. And I thought it is, for example, at the time OCR scanning wasn't so
Hmm.
far advanced as it was now. And of course, historians deal with medieval texts in some kind of Latin dialect, handwritten in some unreadable handwriting. And I was thinking, okay, how can I find this? And then I thought, okay, so one historian goes to an archive and says, okay, I think this is interesting for subject A. And then another historian sees exactly the same archive piece, data, whatever you want to call it, and says, I find it interesting for subject P. And then you have two tags, A and P, and then it's findable by both, depending on your question. So that was actually where it came from. So yeah, it was letters, but it was also information architecture, which is how I rolled into
Yeah,
SEO.
yes. In fact, I remember, I also remember in Italy it was called biblioteconomy,
Mm,
this kind of learning matter. It was an exam, in fact.
mm, mm.
Biblioteconomy. It was very complicated.
I was one of the few who actually liked that.
Yes. But it helped in creating a kind of framework that now we use, because even
Yeah.
if we always say using Google Words, create good content and traffic will come, we know that, and this is sometimes the difficult part of our job when we are talking not only to clients, but sometimes when we are talking to each other as an
Mm,
SEO. Because it's true that we target humans in the sense of final consumer in the case of end consumer in the case of an e-commerce, or potential subscriber for a news website. But we sometimes forget that we are not doing directly talking with the potential end consumer as if we were in a physical shop, but through something that is mediating between us and them. And before they were just the Google bot, Bing bot, so the classic crawlers. Now they are also AI agent bot. And to make it even simpler, now we are not just talking to human beings, but we have to talk also to synthetic beings like
mhm,
the agents when we talk about agentic search, not really not just about AI model.
mm,
So that's why maybe all these things that we are stressing a lot about, I know you're stressing too, which is the true meaning of semantics, the true meaning of structured data, which must not be confused with schema. Structured data is another thing, it's not including just schema. And this is one of the classic misunderstanding in the SEO world. Has become so important, and maybe it's becoming so important to educate about these topics and how they reflect also on all the other things that we were doing and we need still to do as an SEO because of this, because we need to have a dialogue pointing to the end user, but maybe knowing that this user is going to be reached through a medium, technical medium, and that maybe we are delegating an AI agent in the future to talk with our potential customer. What are your views in all these? Once we have this sort of monolithic SEO is synonym of Google SEO, and now everything has exploded to needing to understand how many different players are treating the things. How do you deal with this? Your and goes, as sometimes many do, into a sort of rabbit hole, trying to understand each model, or as instead, for instance, is my case, I try to find the common denominator in order to not get crazy and not having to triple my work just because I have to do, okay, this thing is fine for Google, this thing is fine for ChatGPT, I have to harmonize them, etc. How is your process?
Yeah, I think it is similar to programming. If you understand how JSON works, how databases work, how programming languages work with common patterns they have, like loops and switches and variables and objects and scopes and stuff like that. If you understand the mechanisms behind that, then it doesn't really matter what the name of the language is anymore. You see variables, you see functions, you see classes, whatever. In databases, if you know SQL, it doesn't matter if you work with Postgres or BigQuery or something similar. So I think I'm looking for something similar in LLMs. So they have these technologies behind them, and I'm trying to find what the common or the shared mechanisms are behind those technologies. And not just the LLMs that you chat with in a chat interface, but I assume that Google will play quite a big role in this, not just in search engine results pages, but also in Gmail, for example, or just on your phone, always on. It's going to be everywhere, whether we like it or not. I don't like it, by the way, personally, but that's another story. But the mechanisms behind those models are what I'm looking for. So what different types of LLMs are there, or language models are there, or natural language processing models are there, machine learning models, whatever, bidirectional or not. Yeah. And what I'm trying to find is, okay, what in general is it that they seem
Mhm.
to like? So what do humans like? What do they seem to like? And where is the common ground in this? It's not doable to know all of them. And I do know that every model has its nuances or other sources, but I think that kind of depends on the market you're working in. So where is your target audience interacting
Mhm.
on the web? Are they more looking videos, or are they engaging in social chats or whatever? And then you will probably see it for yourself in the data which model is the most dominant.
Yes. And this makes me come to my mind. You recently shared on LinkedIn that the concept of the search market research and share of search, so that visibility is not just to make it very simple. It's not just, your own snippet, for instance, in Google search, but also how much you as a brand are dominating the SERP in all the features, in all the SERPs. And which is, as I told you in answering to your LinkedIn, is something that I'm exploring for a very, very long time too. Also because sometimes, and again, this is maybe one of the many things that sometimes many SEO tend to fall into, is considering organic search only the classic search snippet. Just an anecdote. The other day I was uh, Facebook forum, Italian Facebook forum, and there was a guy blaming Google that his search snippet, the search result, was in a SERP where were just 7 separate organic search results. And because of all the SERP features, it was pushed to below, way, way below the fold. Then I did a search and I see, okay, but we have one paid position above. Okay. Then there is a AI overview. I know we all dislike it because the CTR is very awful, but formally the AI overview is organic. Then we have a map, which is apart from the advertisement that can be also in the local pack, but are substantially organic. Then there was a first organic search results. That's organic. We all agree. Then
Mhm.
there was something that is very European, the places site. So, the carousel with presenting alternative to Google Maps where you can find. And okay, even if they are very weird and just decided by Google who to present, there is a strong correlation between who is ranking first page and who is presenting places sites. They are still organic. Then there is people also ask is organic. So this is to say that many times people is forgetting that organic is not just a search snippet.
Yeah, you could. say that there are several types of organic results within a single SERP, together with paid. What I did, at one time, several things. One, it's becoming clearer and clearer that in order to be successful in Google, let's just call it simple like that, you need to do more than just write text and try to rank in classic 10 blue links. I remember Renee Bigelow, she literally said this. It's classic communications theory that if you want someone to remember your message, you need to repeat it, let's say 20 to 40 times, and you need to do it in at least 3 to 5 different ways. So I'm translating that as being present not just on top keywords but in a market and all kinds of aspects and all kinds of alleys and directions within a market. So that is the width of where you need to be present, but also in the 3 to 5 several ways. So depending on what it is your consumers are consuming, if it's about information. So that is one reason. And the other reason is something I realized is that a search engine result page is not just a page with search results. It is a shopping window of that market. I call it a shopping window as a metaphor. Google sees a lot. I wouldn't say that they see the whole internet, but I cannot think of another company that sees as much as Google does. And what they see, they interpret, they calculate, and they present it on their results page, thinking, if you are looking for something, maybe you can find the answer here. That is what they do. So I was thinking, okay, if I look at it through this lens, it's actually a shopping window of an entire market. And whatever is online about this market will find its way in some way, not everything, I know, but a lot, to that SERP. So what I set out to do is I didn't really look at it from an SEO point of view, but more from a market research point of view. So if this is my data source that shows me what goes on in a market online, how can I analyze it then? And that is what I built. I think it's interesting for SEOs as well, but it's mostly interesting for C-level types who want to know, okay, what is the market? What are the players? What are people asking? But in bulk, what are their emotions? How visible are we? Does it go up? Does it go down? Stuff like that. And yeah, it's still evolving.
No, but it's interesting because very similar to my thinking in the sense that people are used to listening to a session already heard me saying this many, many times. I, for instance, totally dislike doing classic keyword research. Not only because it's very boring, but because keyword research usually needs a combination of Google Search Console analysis plus combined with third-party tool analysis. And this third-party tool analysis, maybe they create a database over other people historical keywords inputted by their clients in the project and so on. And so how much is valuable that kind of database? I don't know. Sometimes yes, sometimes quite questionable. So I said, who really knows what people want when they search for something? And I say, Google, like you. Google. What is the purpose of Google? I don't, probably, I can also sound like a, a Google fanboy, but sincerely, if you know me, you know that I'm quite critical to Google too. So Google has one purpose: always maintain it, even when he was saying, "Don't be evil." He wants to be the source connecting what's in the internet to what people are searching. So if you're searching something, I can offer you. The fact is that Google has so much data, the classic so-called knowledge base, that instantly knows what someone is searching statistically when he's doing a search. And that's why all the elements painted in a search result pages are valuable because are based on this knowledge. So for instance, the same search menu change depending on the search because of implied knowledge that Google has about that search. Maybe if you are searching for, I don't know, sneakers, in the search menu, apart all AI mode, you can see first video or first image, the news. But if you're searching for Gulf situation, probably the first vertical that you're going to see is news. So this is a very simple example, but when all the feature, why is presenting something in a very transactional query, you also present maybe apart the shopping guides that are somehow related to merchant. But you can also find sometimes very informational search feature like the people also ask, because maybe Google has understood that people wants to buy something, but they need to be solved some doubts before taking the final decision to click and go to an e-commerce or click and going to the specific Google Shopping product page. So this
Yeah,
is
so we only
very
need to read it.
interesting,
It's already
the
there.
cool thing of analyzing these kind of things.
Yeah. I think
And
one thing I also realized when I was starting with this analysis is that I don't need to reinvent the wheel. Google has done a better job at this than I ever will. So I only need to read what they already are showing within a market.
yes, but Robert Van, and maybe this is what you are trying to resolve with this future tool, is how to systematize this kind of
Mm,
observation, because if not, can be really time consuming and painful.
yeah.
It's not something that you can see. And this is because it's fun because SEO is something that we always say SEO results, you need time to see them. But then when it comes to our own job, we want everything now,
Mm,
immediately. I'm thinking, and I already want an Excel file or a spreadsheet with all the things that I'm thinking already be done. And yes, this kind of visual analysis can be done. There are ways to make it make them faster. I'm using them, but
yeah.
surely this is maybe the creating a tool. And I'm asking to you about maybe the struggle you are having creating the tool is how to really find a workflow in order to make this kind of a SERPs analysis scalable.
Hmm. Yeah.
Kind of
That is,
difficulties you have. You are fading. It's more a difficulty in the sense of defining these things means this, or defining the actual retrieval of the information from the search.
yeah, different things. It depends on how big the site is you're doing the analysis for. Currently, I'm testing it for a big website, literally millions of product pages, for example, and it needs to be compared with other competitors that are equally big. And the scale, it's doable if you make thoughtful choices, what to use and what not to choose, prioritize basically. But I would call that the biggest difficulty. The biggest difficulty is making sure that it doesn't fall apart because a lot of moving parts. But that is the IT part of it. But I'm not void coding it. Let's just call it that. Parts of it. But anyway, what is interesting here is that it's I just call it SERP analysis. That's because that's what it is. But if you do it for 50K pages at the same time, SERPs at the same time, then you need some smart things to be able to pull it off. And there's already a lot of smart things out there on GitHub or whatever, answering really specific questions. So I can use that, and I do. So, for example, a really nice thing on SERPs is people ask questions. They provide a window into the psychology of people. People have a need, an emotion, a fear, curiosity, whatever, which is the reason why they ask a certain question. A keyword is an expression of that as well, but usually in a shorter form. So questions provide more context. And I am still assuming that these are real questions people ask. That is an assumption.
Now,
Um,
usually, this is the definition that Google gives to about people also ask. They say they are somehow, again, from the knowledge base, they retrieve the most common question people ask about that something, let's call it entity, topic, whatsoever, that is implied in the keyword,
Hmm.
in the search word. So yes, they probably are not literally
That's
question made
fine.
by people, but they are a good, valid representation of question. For
Yeah,
instance,
they need to
maybe one
deduplicate it as
question
well.
is
Yeah.
the synthesized version of thousands of questions that are substantially asking the same thing.
No, one thing that is really nice about those also asked things is that they can provide insights, but you must not use embeddings for that, for example. So if you do analysis for texts, many people are now looking at embeddings and say, I can use an embedding because that shows me what the entity space, vector space of this question is. But that is about the topic, the subject, something like that. But it's not about the emotion behind it. You need reasoning for that. That is a different type of analysis that you need to do. So some words that are used within a question could be an expression of a totally different emotion behind that question. And if you are analyzing emotions, you don't need the subject the question is about. You need the emotion that is behind it. You already know the subject, but you need to know if it's positive or negative, or if it's fear, if it's to do, or whatever. And that is something interesting I was dealing with just this morning. Is okay, which types of I need a quite hefty language model for that, with reasoning capabilities to be able to analyze that at scale. And that
Yes.
is the nice thing about this. It's a fun analysis. It's a fun project to work on, and it's already pretty good.
It's
But
interesting that you're talking about sentiment because everything sentiment was not saying neglected, but it was substantially not considered because in classic search, when we think in terms of ranking, sentiment analysis is not applied to search results.
it
But
should.
for, yes, but it's implied, it's applied in local search.
Mm,
In local search, yes, a Google business profile page can rank better or rank worse depending on the implied sentiment Google detect
mm,
analyzing the reviews, which it was obliged to do because if not, businesses with very awful reviews could outrank very, on the contrary, businesses with very positive review just because they did better local SEO.
yeah, no
So
such
for
thing
this
as bad
reason,
publicity.
yeah, this reason, one of the factors we know is the number of reviews. So they
Hmm.
didn't care to have very bad review. They care just to have 5,000 reviews. And maybe there was, I don't know, a legit, cool, and very appreciated small business with just 15 reviews. And because of this number was always outranked by the bad guy.
Mm,
So in local search was already used. But it's interesting that you are introducing the concept of sentiment because I think it is a logic passage to do. Also for us SEO, if we want to optimize our content, our PDP, our PLPs, our landing pages, our guides and article, to be relevant about a topic is not just be relevant about the topic, is
exactly.
probably going to be relevant about the need. And the need is not something which is ruled only by logic, by rationality. Sometimes
It's
I
just the
need
subject.
something
Yeah.
because I have an urgency. Sometimes I would need something, for instance, in the informational space, because I'm curious. Sometimes the need is really driven by a human sentiment, which is can
Hmm.
be urgency, which can be curiosity, which can be a commodity, which can be learning, something like this. It's as learning is aspiration to what? To be better, something like this.
Hmm.
And therefore, being able to combine a correct market analysis or buyer persona analysis, audience analysis, good to separate everything to be sure. And what we are going to, and let's say, relevance in the more classic sense is correct because so when you're creating something, you know that people, if you are not just only targeting, are relevant because of correctly targeting the topic and correctly targeting the search intent, but also targeting this between brackets sentiment behind the search intent. You know that people are going to stay with you,
Well, it's
with your
that,
page. You are
but
going to
also,
accumulate all those already classic user signals with Google values as quality signals.
yeah, true.
And in terms more practical for, let's say, for a stakeholder, a CMO, if you are satisfying your user, this user will probably stay on your website and maybe converting or maybe return to your website and
Yep.
converting in a second moment, and so on and so on. It's a,
It's a
let's say,
cla-
it's a interesting things that people should start.
yeah.
Like
It's a classic example of basically SEO becoming more important for business because we're doing good research and providing insights into market, psychology, whatever, that other departments within the company can use as well, should use as well. Yeah, that. Also, this type, I think I haven't finalized it yet, but I think this type of analysis is really good for helping us to basically write down what it is that written down what it is that a company actually does and doesn't do. So where can they help consumers? Where shouldn't consumers go there? Which makes it more practical. And it sounds a little bit off to say we cannot help you in this case, but that is how chats work, how AI works, or LLMs work, or whatever you want to call it. So someone is having a conversation that says, "I need a solution to my problem X." And the chatbot knows about this person. They know the projects they are working on, the things they like or dislike. And then it says, given your context, I can say to you, definitely go to that site and not that one, even though they sell the same type of products, for example. And that has to do with the way a company presents itself, the way problems are solved. One thing, for example, I am a European and I am worried about big tech. And I am moving away from American big tech because I don't trust them. I think no European should. And I'm looking at software that is not hindered by the Cloud Act. And so one of the things so I am in chat and I say, okay, I need a software solution for this. And then my chat knows, you don't want your privacy is important for you. You don't want your data to be in the US. You don't want the data of your clients to be in the US. Important distinction. Given that situation of yours, these are the things you should not do, or the companies you should not go to, because these ones are in the US or whatever. And that is a typical example. Even though they might be better optimized or stuff like that, my chat interface still isn't recommending them because of my context.
And I think that want to move just to a related but different topic. So you were saying, okay, knowing the sentiment, knowing what people really want, and so on, can help me. We're doing the sample of it about us, for instance, what we do, what we don't do, and especially the AI models, large language model, because of their probabilistic nature, they really don't know what, for instance, rhetoric is. What is rhetorical figure or what is irony? They can mimic irony, but they are not able to create by scratch irony, for instance. And so you say, okay, returning to the first topic, which was the structured data. When we talk about structured data, it's not only schema. Schema can be important for many things. There is a lot of talking about schema because of FAQ deprecation in these days, which drives me crazy because it makes very visible how many people should return to study somehow. And I'm not ironic. Should study what is the difference between structured data, what is the difference with schema, where schema is useful in what phase of information retrieval, and so on and so on. That schema is not the same that rich result, blah, blah, blah. But let's talk about structured data. So structured data includes also schema, but includes also, if you think in text, in code, all the classic semantic HTML, for instance, but also things that are included in the same concept of, let's call it very generically, natural writing, natural language. So you were presenting something like, good example, for instance, when you are creating content, written content in this case, pay attention. Don't, without making sounds like a bot, make, instead of using me, I, them, etc., use the name, the entity. Can you
Yeah.
explain better this kind of recommendation?
Yeah. The keyword here is utility writing,
Yes.
which is basically a schema of structured data infused into natural language.
Mm-hmm.
Um, the idea being that language machines like LLMs or others don't point to documents anymore in a list, but they synthesize answers based on parts of text. And those parts, there are different names for it, propositions, triples, and everything in between. But let's just say that a small self-contained piece of text, like a sentence or two sentences that are about a subject, and they belong together in a container in HTML with a heading above it or something like that. But it should be, the basic idea would be, it should be self-containable. So if it's taken out of context, that is the page. So, for example, if it's used in an answer of an LLM, it should still be useful for both the LLM and a user. So a classic thing that goes wrong here is a reference to an object or a subject, like for instance, a person. So if a sentence starts with, he does this thing called X, then if that is taken out of context, then both people and LLMs don't know what he means. Where does it refer to? Especially if we have an article that has named several people. Which one is it? So that is a classic example there where if taken out of context, it should be, it should still be clear, useful, what that proposition or triple or whatever is about. This is especially interesting when you try to apply this to, for example, e-commerce listing pages, because they are very thin in their content. I think this is a prime example of where LLM optimization and search optimization diverge. Although I do think that they can both be helped with this. But for example, if you have a product page, not a listing page, a product page, a clearer example, a product page, so one level deeper, a product page, and you have specifications for a product, a table
Mhm.
with, it has to be a table, by the way, an HTML table and not divs. But that is another thing.
Yeah,
Um,
yes. I know,
it's
because I'm dealing with a B2B client where we are substantially recovering from all the PDF catalogs, all the
mm,
tables of the specification, and talking with his developer to make sure that they are true tables.
HTML tables, yeah. So
All classic tables.
yes, and they should be, and semantics. So there should be a heading above it or something else, but a heading would work just fine. That says specifications, but not just specifications. It should say specifications of and then the product name. So subject, relationship, object, or other way around. So the columns in the table, they provide context. And then within the rows are the values of the specifications. And then an LLM can understand, it's in this column and the name of that column is that. So that is basically the category where this value is applied to. That is semantics in effect. That is something we should do a lot more with. um,
Yes, but this is, for instance, can be done for, let's say, to maintain your example of a product page. For instance, when I was talking about B2B, this kind of content is can be also sold very fast and very quickly to the client. But let's say a retail e-commerce site where the text is substantially the minimal possible. Usually it's
mhm.
just a few notes like the product name and then some kind of boilerplated content which is okay, you can return the product within 3 days for free, etc., or the price, obviously, but the content is very, very small, and you have
And generic.
instead
Yeah.
this great use of visual content like
Mm.
image and video. So, what to do there in this case? Because you cannot, usually, it's very hard to sell to
Hmm.
a client. Okay, we need to put some more text in this context. But I have an answer that I will tell you after. But what will you do?
What I would prefer to do, and I know that this is not always possible, but what I would prefer to do is to be there at the table at the moment the product page is designed or when new components are getting designed by UX, by the designer. And then have this input that says, okay, we are designing a component that shows the average rating, for example. We should have a heading above it that says average rating of product X. Maybe we should apply an area label that introduces a little bit the value of the average rating that is displayed afterwards. Maybe sometimes we say, okay, we want a small sentence. One sentence can be enough that explains what it is that folks are seeing here. We can discuss if we will show it immediately, if we show it on desktop, if we show it on mobile, something like that. So that would be my preferred route. So that would mean that the SEOs are literally mingling in the design of the page, but I think it's necessary. That is how I do it right now, by the way, trying to because one step back, if you are announcing things and writing the context down within the words that the context is applied to, that usually means you need more words. And that has consequences for UX of a page. And people don't like, well, they want to get their job done. They're not necessarily there to read a lot of words. And I'm still researching this. One thing I did find out was that there are several types of sentences that one could use. And depending on the first sentence, which I call a situation, I will explain it later, people will actually read or skip the next sentence. So if the next sentence is longer and a little bit dry with facts, it doesn't matter if people are skipping it anyway because they read it, because they know it doesn't apply to them. So one thing I did find out was it's two sides of the same medal, which I call a situation and a closer. And the situation is classic emotional level copywriting. It's not the same as emotional, it's a situation. So it basically means you're writing the situation down where someone who reads it can say, ah, this applies to me. And if it applies to them, then they are willing to read the rest because it applies to them. And the stuff that applies to them, that can be dry, can be fact based, can be a little bit longer. That's okay because they need that information. And that, by the way, means that if you have a situation in a heading, there is a discussion there if you need to use keywords there or not. I would say many times not. That is an interesting discussion. But I want people to read what comes next. But eventually, it has to be solved in design and in persuasive copywriting. And those are the two axes, basically. I do it right now.
I agree with you. Usually, I also would like it. Sometimes I succeed in being in the design room, as you were saying. And for instance, you were saying, just very quick, I wouldn't put keywords in the H1. I mean, if it's the name of a product, it must be the name of a product. But what I would suggest to a designer is just below, for instance, in the visual space of the product name, just below a 10 long words space for a phrase, which is a trigger, the one you say, the situation phrase. I would
Mm.
put it there so that people can, ooh, this is the product I'm looking for. And so I can eventually go, and they are using correctly in the very correct sense. The FAQ, using eventually the FAQ, or for instance, if it's, let's say, flowers that you are selling, how to maintain the flower longer when they arrive home, just these kind of quick tips, etc., and about what exactly these flowers are, and so on and so on.
Mm.
But then, because product, and this is correct by the clients, are very tied to visual shopping, I would improve all the things behind the curtains. So in the code related to, in this case, alt tag for the image, I would use a good caption for the video, if there is a video, and so on and so on. And to close also our 1 hour conversation now, returning to the very, very, very start when we were talking about search feature, these are also the way you can optimize your PDP for being visible in all the most interesting and relevant feature you want to target with that
Yeah,
PDP.
there's as far as I'm concerned, I think product pages and listing pages and e-commerce sites are a prime example of what many in the SEO space have not been doing, because there are a lot of things we can do to improve the comprehension of those pages or what is on there. A lot of things that we can do to make sure that machines understand better what is said there, but we haven't done that because we used stuff like incoming links, siloing, maybe ugly texts below it. I usually call them Wikipedia text
Oh,
below.
the classic SEO text,
Yeah, SEO
which
text.
which and just to for our listener and people watching us, remember, if you really are asked to use this kind of text, beware of the risk of
Mm,
creating so much text to transform the the
the
intent of
nature
the
of the
page.
page. Yeah,
Yes, the intent of the page perceived by
yeah,
Google, and it will pass from poor navigational to poor informational, and will
yeah,
start not to rank at all,
yeah,
but for informational queries.
yeah, yeah. And and sometimes people ask on LinkedIn, okay, what are you doing now differently because of LLMs that you didn't do before in SEO? My honest answer is I'm looking more closely to the content on those pages. I already did. I'm looking more closely because of stuff like this. And I think this helps both LLMs and search engines because they understand better what is actually being said on that page. But I think LLMs, especially because I assume they look less closely at internal page rank flow and stuff like that on a page, but on a site, I mean, link texts. That is typically something that Google does to understand the context of a page. I think LLMs are more strict in this, especially in RAG systems. So, yeah, so you do rank despite poor contact,
Mhm.
poor content. You're being fetched in a RAG query, and then the LLM tries to find what it is that your page is about, and then there's nothing on your page, so
Exactly.
nothing useful. Yeah,
Exactly, exactly.
something we should do something about.
And to conclude our conversation, let's stop talking about LLMs and Google and so on, but let's talk about you. You say you comes from humanistic study, and you one of your passion is history. And I know
I
it's
need
maybe
to
a
I
silly
need to
question.
leave, by the way, in 5 minutes. I have to pick up my children
Yeah,
from
yeah,
school.
yes. Just a very quick question.
Yeah.
What is your historical period that you really
Mm.
like to return reading about?
Middle Ages, because it's both here in this exact location, but it feels totally different, and that is weird. And that is why I like it.
Cool. Thank you,
Yeah.
Ramon. Thank you for having shared your time and for this wonderful conversation.
Thank you. I'm sure we'll talk again.
Sure. And remember, all of you, remember, if you want to listen to if you like this conversation, give it a big thumb up on this episode. And if you want to be advised and alerted about new wonderful conversation here on the search session, remember to subscribe. Thank you, and bye bye.